It is Thursday, July 24th, 2025, and it's 11:40, or actually it's 10:40, and we're here to discuss the background check policy. And I will turn it over to our prosecutor's office, and sorry that we went over, but
no worries. I was late getting out of the office anyway, so it worked out well for us. Okay, so it's been a few weeks since we met last at the last BOCC meeting. Our office, utilizing the assistance of one of our law school interns this summer, Mr. Isaac Mumford, presented the BOCC and other relevant department heads and elected officials with an overview of what county background check policies look like, the various components that can be included, and what sort of questions we would need to be answering moving forward in order to ascertain what a background check policy looks like for Shoshone County and what elements we want that policy to include. Based upon the feedback we received and the direction we were tasked by the BOCC with, we set out to do a number of things. First was to solicit certain information from department heads and elected officials to ascertain their needs better, so that way we could ensure that any background check policy that the county was considering had sufficient input from those department heads and elected officials. The second element was to identify what additional questions we think the BOCC and or department heads and elected officials still need to weigh in on for us to continue keeping this ball moving forward. And then lastly was to actually set out to draft a template policy to at least just get some structure in place on paper, subject to significant modification in the future. But at least we have kind of a template starting draft to say, all right, these are the various components we can foresee being included within the policy. This is how the various elements are going to come together and assist you all in trying to envision what this thing's going to look like when it actually hits paper. So with that said, we busted our tails on the back end. I think we got most of that done. And I think the one element that still is missing is just due to the fact that there were two departments that we didn't receive responses from. So we, I'm sure that the department heads and elected officials are probably sick of Isaac bugging them, but he did send out reminder emails periodically. We tried to stay on the various departments, and we got what I would call substantial compliance. Not complete compliance, but substantial. So we decided, hey, let's just put this on paper and let's get it moving forward, and we can fill in the gaps from those other departments that haven't responded. So,
okay.
Are we one that didn't respond?
You were.
I think so.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Sorry,
the clerk's office and the sheriff was the two that we didn't get responses, but we left placeholders for them so we can add them in the future. The one detriment maybe to not having responses back from everyone is we did take the responses we received and we tried to find some way to harmonize the various needs to say, okay, this department has this need, this department has this need, this department has this need. If we put all those together, is there one, policy that can accomplish all three of those simultaneously? So with that said, if there are new or additional elements that come in from those last two departments, we may have to go back to the drawing board and restructure a little bit. But we based our template off of the responses we did receive.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would like to do is I'd like to just start by circulating the various questions I think we still need to answer. Mm-hmm. We'll review them together real quick, and then we'll look at the documents we have, and then we'll go back to those questions and we'll see, hey, are we in a position to answer any of these? Do we want to table some of these? Do we want to solicit elected official and department head feedback on some of these, etc.
Okay.
So I'll start first with a copy of follow-up questions. So first question, does the county want a drug screening policy included within the background check policy? In other words, When we talk about drug screening policies, there's really 3 locations they can be found. You can either plug it into your personnel policy, you can plug it into your background check policy, or you can create its own standalone policy. So understanding that as part of pre-employment and continued employment background checks, we anticipate that there's going to be this element of drug testing that we discussed at our last meeting. So do we want that to just get embedded within this policy, or do we want it to be separate or in a different location? Next question, who's going to have the final approval and hiring decisions for the departments based on the results of the background check? So this was kind of one of those 30,000 foot questions we posed during our presentation at the last meeting. I don't know that we really took any significant steps to try to answer that question, and I think that it's part of kind of the larger policy decision to say, okay, we're going to implement this background check policy. What do we want it to look like? Who's actually doing the background check? Who's reviewing the background check results? Do we want, an independent screening panel that's looking at those results? Do we want the person that's actually doing the hiring to just be able to receive them and conduct their own screening? So I think we need to get some more clarity on that, because whether or not they pass or didn't pass the background check, or whether or not they fall into this category where we're going to be reviewing it on a case-by-case basis, I think we've got to determine who's making that decision so we know, yeah, we're going to hire this employee, or no, we're not going to hire them. To what extent do we want each department to be permitted to modify the various requirements? In other words, do we want the policy to govern and dictate in its entirety, or do we want the policy to say, hey, this is the general structure, and then various departments can decide for themselves if they want A, B, or C? So in other words, do we want to build in intentional elements of discretion, or do we want it to kind of be a standardized policy where each department looks the same and we just try to build the policy such that it can account for everyone's individual concerns? Next, where, how, and for how long do we want the results of those background checks to be stored? And part and parcel with that, who's going to store them and who's going to have access to them? I definitely think there's some privacy considerations that we want to be mindful of.
Would that be possibly our employee records, the clerk?
It could be. It could be, or you could put it in a separate file where maybe there's a destruction period that's shorter, right? Because typically a personnel file doesn't have records that are destroyed. Right?
Okay,
Typically your personnel file lasts into perpetuity. So if we want that record to not be something that's going to last during an employee's entire employment period, maybe it's housed somewhere else. So a consideration for us to at least think through. There's certain separate positions within the county that are housed in different departments, but are actually similar in nature and thus should require a similar background check. We identified this, and we'll go through this spreadsheet in just a minute, but as we were compiling all the feedback and we were taking the terminology and the request of various departments and saying, okay, can we find some way to use similar terminology so they look the same, etc. And then we found, as we were just looking at it, hey, you know what? The concerns of this department and the concerns of this department are the same. The theoretical types of job duties seem like they would be the same, but those two elected officials are asking for 2 very separate requirements for background checks. So is there a difference? Right. Should they be different? And who's going to determine that, right? Is that going to be something where the BOCC is going to say, hey, legal counsel, we've tasked you guys and asked you to do this policy. You guys try to iron all this stuff out. Do you guys want to, serve as an independent review body to say we're going to analyze, positions and determine who's similar? Do we want to put that burden back on the individual departments to just flag it and have legal counsel maybe say, hey, department head, you guys have these 2 positions. They look similar. Schedule a time to talk and let me know by next week, if you do think they're the same and who wants to modify theirs. So I think there's a number of ways we can address it, but it was something that jumped out to us. The next question, are applicants entitled to an individualized case-by-case review of their results? In other words, do we want the applicants to actually get their results personally, or do we just want to inform them of when we run into red flags? So I think that that's something we need to analyze. What conduct do we want to classify as disqualifying conduct, and what conduct do we want to say is going to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis? This question came as a result of us asking the various departments, what type of conduct are you concerned about? In other words, if you were looking at a background check policy, what are you looking for? And we got varying responses from different departments, and we started to notice there was this trend where, okay, this type of criminal conduct we could see as being an absolute no-go, but this type of conduct, maybe it was concerning, but maybe there's justification, reasoning, maybe there's been a prolonged, sustained period of sobriety that this person has demonstrated, that maybe the initial concern has been mitigated over time. So we thought, well, rather than just identifying what types of conduct is concerning, maybe we should separate out and create two categories. One is, if this pops up on your background check, it's done, you're not eligible for employment. If these things pop up on your background check, we're going to give you an opportunity to respond, provide explanation, we'll review it, and then somebody will make a determination on whether or not they want to let you through the gate or not let you through the gate. Next question. Is there ever a circumstance where the county would be ordering a fingerprint check for an individual without also ordering an advanced criminal history check? And Lance, maybe this is a question that you could provide some insight on. Maybe not. I don't want to put you on the spot in answering that. But, we noted that there were a number of background check policies out there when we were doing our cross-analysis of different jurisdictions that had those two separate ones. And as we started looking at positions, we thought, well, is there ever an instance where we would do one but not the other? Or are these always going to go together and this could just be one category? So, Lance, I don't know if you have insight on that. I think, your department is probably one that's ordering fingerprint checks on all of your law enforcement.
All employees.
And I'm guessing you're doing the advanced criminal history check on
all employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Just with the access they have. If they're going into dispatch, potentially into the jail, we usually fingerprint and do that on all of them.
In the advanced check.
Yep.
Okay. So I don't know, it was just a thought. It was, are we making too many categories for ourselves, and can we actually consolidate and simplify it a little bit? Similar questions. The very next one also asks, are we ever going to do a full personal investigation but not do a polygraph, or are those always going to go together?
So there is instances where we would probably do just more of an investigation and not a poly, like probably the records clerk and evidence. We may or may not poly. We haven't had to hire one in a long time.
Okay.
So I guess that's something we need to establish whether we would or not. Anybody who's going in a law enforcement role gets polyed.
But they also get the full personal investigation.
They get the full personal investigation as well. The a posse guy may be one who would just be just a investigation, just in-house investigation with our part-time detective, but no poly.
Okay. All right. So maybe we do keep them separate then.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. So these three questions all kind of carry a similar theme. So this is the last one on the first page. Would we ever need to just review a driving record without reviewing other criminal history? Like, are there any positions where we say, and maybe they're not public facing, they're not going to have access to, goods, equipment, etc. They're not going to have access to money, but maybe they're still operating vehicles or equipment, and we still want to know what their driving record looks like. I don't know if there's any positions that fit that mold, but if there are, theoretically, it could save costs by just reviewing driving record and not actually having to order a criminal history. So I think it would be important for us to analyze that question and try to decide yes, no, or otherwise. And then lastly, on the second page, this spilled over, does the BOCC want the drug policy, whether it's going to be included in our background check, in our personnel policy, or its own standalone policy? Do we want it to have pre-employment screening, meaning before you get hired, you've got to pass your drug test? Continued screening if somebody's in a safety sensitive position or operating heavy machinery or operating with the CDL, and or post-accident screening, meaning an accident occurs and by default we're going to say, hey, this person's just going to get random UA'd because an accident occurred on the job. So do we want all three of them, any combination of them, etc.? So I think that's the last question answered.
For me, I would say all three.
Yeah, I mean, if you're seeking legal input, best practice would be to have all three. The rebuttable response is, okay, and we just have to understand that the more we UA test, the more we expend or incur costs.
Right.
So, yeah, but I definitely think it's best practice, right? If we're
Yes.
wanting to say, hey, how can we protect the
Yes.
county? I would say all three components would be best practice.
Yes.
What does that run?
Oh, goodness. Lance, you probably do as many of them as anyone.
I don't think they're crazy expensive to get done. We could look at potentially in-house testing if for an accident or something like that, where all my deputies, our detention deputy stuff, we UA'd many a probationer, so we could a rapid test would be fine in certain I don't know, depends on how in depth you want to get, but I don't think it's crazy expensive to get a UA done. No.
Oh, wow.
I think the last time I saw numbers for kits, I think it was like $35.
Yeah, something like that.
And like I said, don't quote me. I'm just trying to give you guys an estimate. But I think it was like 35.
I can't remember the last bill. I think it's like $35.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable.
And then if you need to send it off for an advanced panel, that's where the cost goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But your standard, I think, 7-panel screening, or is it 5 or 7 panel, was like $35.
And what's that? What does that?
I don't want to misspeak. Maybe we can bounce that one off.
Okay.
Mike Smith.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
He's the pro.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask him. I just want to know just for.
It's
Just
essentially
because.
like the 5 or 7 most
Yeah,
common
it's
controlled
most,
substances. And then if they're like, I think this person's got, ketamine on board or something, and that's not in the 7-panel test, then they can send it off for screening. Or if they're saying, hey, this person's, 7-panel came back negative, but I can visibly see signs of impairment. So there's something else on board. Maybe it's not common. Maybe it's bath salts or something like that. We're going to send it off for additional.
Oh, so you send it off for I can see that.
Yeah.
So it may not come back, and you may have something else that you're.
Yeah.
And the additional screenings where you get up into the hundreds of dollars.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So, all right. So that's the questions.
Okay.
I think we can move past the questions. We'll review everything else just briefly, and then we'll come back and we'll see. You guys want to answer some questions? Do you want to brainstorm, etc.? So, next I will hand each of you guys the spreadsheet that our wonderful intern created for you all.
And I just want to apologize for the small print. I can flip around or send you a digital copy later if you'd like.
Oh, us older people are fine.
Yeah, I
Sorry
just
about that.
went and I can see it.
So what he did was he took all the responses we received from the various departments. He tried to standardize them. So he tried to use similar terminology, similar language. He tried to identify what the various department heads were trying to articulate. And then he formalized it into this spreadsheet. You'll notice, I know we didn't label the columns, but if you go to columns 4 and 5, you'll see where we have potential disqualifiers and then automatic disqualifiers. This was all part of one question, and we put 2 columns because I think we probably want 2 columns. So I think we're probably going to want to review the responses and figure out which of those do we still want to be an automatic disqualifier? And do some of them we actually want to bump over to a potential disqualifier, subject to case-by-case review?
So just a quick note. What you see right now in automatic disqualifiers, that's all the information that I received from every department. So I haven't, I haven't moved them around yet. So it's in that category just because I split the categories and we didn't talk about what we wanted to compare.
Okay.
So I apologize for that.
You're going to see where we've got a couple of just blank columns, and I think that those columns are subject to change depending on, you know, what it is you guys want implemented in the policy. But we put them there as placeholders just to say conceptually, these are, you know, a checkbox where we can say this position, yes or no, check. So that deals with, you know, initial drug screening and continued drug screening. If we decide we want to do post-accident, I would say that should apply to every employee.
Yes.
So that's why we didn't put a third column.
Okay.
We just have the 2 columns because these 2 columns are going to only apply to certain employees.
I got a question. Just looking at these automatic disqualifiers, I see a lot of them say any criminal history.
Yep, so that's where we're probably going to want to take those and put it in the category for potential disqualifiers.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Like I said, I didn't get a chance to actually split up these. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was
automatic
just gonna say if you have
disqualifiers.
any criminal history and you're disqualified from the position, then we
No,
right,
right, yeah.
disqualified.
No, it's just a placeholder. So we've got it there as a placeholder. And
I'll be
we
going
can separate them.
Separate
Yeah.
that out later. Yeah.
Because they weren't one of the questions.
It was
of
one
felony?
category.
Yeah.
It was just red flag conduct was one category.
Yeah.
And it was including everything from any
Okay.
criminal history up to like sexual felonies.
Yeah,
and
because
stuff.
Shoshone
Okay.
County caught me at a party when I was 18. Got that $100 fine.
Yeah.
Disqualified.
Yep.
You're going to note near the end of this column list, there's a column that says public facing. We asked this question because we felt it would be pertinent in analyzing whether or not there's certain types of conduct that we might be concerned about if we've got an individual that's going to be regularly engaging with the public, most notably in situations that could be hostile, right? So if we've got somebody that, you know, maybe has a slew of misdemeanor convictions for assault and battery, maybe they would be eligible for a position because misdemeanor offenses might not be an automatic disqualifier, but perhaps if they're in a position that's high conflict and is public facing, then maybe that's something we want to review on a case-by-case basis and determine that they're not eligible. The last 2 columns, similar to the disqualifier question, we asked this just in one format, and as we received responses, we realized that maybe we should separate this into 2 questions, and that is, are you operating county equipment? And then the second question is that county equipment heavy machinery or would it otherwise require a CDL? Because I do think that there might be circumstances where we want to treat those 2 categories differently. So, yeah, you guys are more than welcome to skim through this. Like I said, we will continue updating it as we have new or more information. But we just wanted to reduce all of the responses into one readable format to make it easy for you guys to digest.
Okay.
And again, I'm happy to email a larger print version or anything like that.
No.
All right, are you guys ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've got a draft sample of a policy. Disclaimer, this is very rough draft. It's just trying to put something in writing so you guys can try to visualize it. You'll note on our table of contents, we've got a number of sections. As we dive into the actual body of it, we start out with just a general purpose overview that explains why we're implementing a background check policy. Next, we talk about the scope of the background check, and you'll see where we have kind of 4 categories of criminal background checks, and those 4 categories are designed to kind of escalate in intensity or severity. We originally started with 7, I think.
6 or 7, yeah.
And we consolidated it down a little bit. Now, if we want to take, for instance,
Yes, we do. We didn't get a public copy.
Oh.
Here, please take mine.
We can definitely get a copy. If we need to separate, for instance, 2D and, move the polygraph from the full investigation, we can do that. Like I said, we're just putting in some placeholders right now to try to visualize what this might look like. Moving on, you'll see section 3 near the bottom of page 1. The process itself is largely undecided because we haven't really formalized what we want that to look like. So we penciled this in as a placeholder, but we're going to need to spend some time thinking through what it actually looks like when we're implementing this. Section 4 talks about evaluation criteria, and I think we can structure this in a couple of different ways. We drafted up kind of 2 sample versions, and so you'll see on the top of page 2, you've got kind of the first variation, and then below it, it says alternatively, and then there's a second variation. So I think you can structure this in different ways, but at least we've got something there to ponder. Section 5 talks about additional criteria that may be determined on a case-by-case basis. I anticipate that we're going to have some sort of reference where we pull in this spreadsheet, and we rely on this spreadsheet to provide a lot of the context for the policy. So this will likely turn into like Exhibit A, for instance, and then it will get incorporated into the policy so it's easier to modify and update. You'll also note where we are trying to separate out whether or not the person doing the hiring is going to be the person that's reviewing these background checks. I think that structurally that could change the way the process looks significantly. It likely would either require us to go out and bring on a HR consulting firm that does the analysis, which iCrimp would probably tell you that's best practice. iCrimp says that that's what they do, but I think it's also going to cost a good amount of change. So maybe that's not where we want to spend our money. That decision's ultimately up to you all. If we want to handle it internally, are we okay with the department heads or whoever's doing the hiring to do the reviewing themselves? Or do we want to put together kind of a subcommittee that, consists of various employees from around the county that, meet every time there's a new background check to review, and they schedule time to do it and give kind of an independent third-party evaluation to the person doing the hiring to say they did or didn't pass the background check. So I think that could go a number of ways, and that'll be part of what we're vetting out. Section 6 encompasses the circumstance where maybe we're doing a background check for continued employment and not just for new employees. So conceptually, what comes to mind on a background check for most people is anytime we're going to hire someone, we do a background check. But there is a subcategory of employees that I think the county may want to say, hey, for this type of employee, based upon the nature and sensitivity of the work they do, we want them to have to undergo a new background check every 10 years or something like that. So I think we want to at least reserve the ability to have it apply beyond initial employment. Section 7 is a clause that's designed to account for employees that are dishonest or misrepresenting the contents of their background check. Section 8 is a placeholder for a drug testing policy. So if we decide, hey, we want drug testing to be incorporated in this, then Section 8 would be where we could plug it in. Section 9 deals with that credit check. We didn't know if the county was going to have a specific interest in doing credit checks. From some of the responses we got back, it sounded like there were a number of different departments that said, yeah, I've got employees that I would like to have a credit check on. And so we plugged in this subsection, and then the last subsection is the privacy provision, where we're going to try to identify where these records are going to be kept, how long are we going to keep them for, and who gets to have access to them. So that's an overview of the rough draft that we've got. You'll see on the very last page, my intern left a little note for himself from a follow-up research task that I asked him to do. So you'll know one of the things he'll be working on when we're done here. And I also did some research I looked briefly into, whether or not Idaho has any renewed or updated standards on drug policies for drug testing. Last time I checked, and last time I had been asked to draft a drug testing policy for a public entity, Idaho really didn't have any legal guidance on the process. It appears that that's likely still the case. Idaho doesn't have a whole lot of guidance on it. They don't give us specific parameters that says this is exactly what you need to do if you're going to implement a drug testing policy. It seems like the standard is still, drug testing as long as it's uniform. In other words, if everyone's being drug tested when they're coming on board, you're safe. If you can identify something that makes a position unique, you're typically safe. And then as you move forward and say, okay, is there going to be continued testing? Mm-hmm. I think once again, uniformity is key. So is it truly random? Mm-hmm. And are these employees that are subject to a higher level of safety concern? In other words, are they, operating heavy machinery or operating with a CDL? Are they handling hazardous materials? Things like that. Then I think they fall into this category, and we have a lot more flexibility in making those employees randomly UA. I did pull just some federal guidance to see, hey, what's the best practice there? Like I said, I've drafted drug testing policies for public entities before, so I'll definitely steal that work I've done previously so we don't have to recreate the wheel, and we can save time for the county. But in any event, I did pull the current status of federal regulations, specifically the Department of Transportation, the Federal Department of Transportation, just to see what their policy looks like, because if it's a federal policy, it can probably be relied on to be compliant with best practices. They also, within their policy, had some provisions for ongoing testing that asked the employer, the department, to set kind of benchmarks for the frequency of testing, which I thought was insightful. So for instance, in any given budget year, if Department X says we're going to do random urinalysis testing for these positions, they're going to commit to random UAs for 25% of their employees every year. So it's random, but they also set a quota for themselves to say, this is how we're going to ensure that it's randomized. So I'm just sharing that with you to say these are some of the research and brainstorming that's going on behind the scenes on our end as we try to think through what this policy might look like. So with that said, comments, questions, concerns about what we've done to this point?
Just a quick question on, I know the drug testing can get to where it's a violation here, the Fourth Amendment. So how does that work when we just bring out a new one and say now drug testing is required? Let's say, if we start having, like, for folks who are going to take home a county vehicle or use a county vehicle, and if we decided that that's what we wanted to do to make sure that, a pre-employment prerequisite, since we haven't done it before, I mean,
So my advice and guidance would be, if it's a pre-employment task and the person's already employed, that ship has probably sailed. Okay. If it's an ongoing employment task and that employee hasn't been subject to it previously, I think they'll be subject to it once we update our policy. And I don't think that's any different than any other amendment to our personnel policy. Okay. If we're amending our personnel policy, they need to comply with those amendments. And part of this process is, I would encourage the county, once you get this to a form that you are ready to adopt, that we likely send this out to all the employees that might be subject to any of the requirements in it, and have them verify or validate that they received a copy of it, that they've reviewed it, and are willing to comply with it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea.
So no different than we would with an update to the personnel policy.
Yeah, or like the credit card policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions?
No, thank you for working on this.
You bet. Yeah.
Do you want to go through some of the questions, or do you want to?
Totally up to you guys. You guys
tell me if you want to do that. We've got 11:30.
We have a public hearing.
Yeah, we have 11 hearing, public hearing.
Yeah, tax deed hearing.
Okay.
We can try, we can try. Do you want to go through like 4 or 5 of them?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
Wouldn't hurt.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's just start from the top.
All right. So drug testing policy. Do we want it in the background check policy or do we want it somewhere else?
I like it in the policy.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
And what? I'm sorry.
I like including the drug screening in the background check policy.
Okay.
To me, that's logical. Just my
Yeah.
opinion.
Okay.
Question 2. Do we want to skip that one?
Yeah,
That's a big one.
I would say we skip that one for now.
I know how it works in our agency. The sheriff gets the final say, but
Yeah,
we kind of table it as a team. So we have layers to the hiring already in place, and normally it'd be like a captain, myself, and the sheriff making the final decision based off all of the information we've gathered from the background itself and the poly, and we take all that in, and we hash it out, pros and cons, and make that decision.
So I think questions 2 and 3 are probably related enough in nature. So maybe I'll let you guys mull those over and we'll come back to those. Because I think the key component there is if we want it to be reviewed entirely in-house by the hiring official, if we want it to be outsourced to an independent third party, or if we want something in the middle like an internal review panel.
Okay.
And, suffice it to say, I think that there are pros and cons to each. A misconception that I can probably address is that an elected official or department head that's responsible for hiring isn't going to be forced to hire an employee they don't want to hire, right? So that decision should have already been made. Like, hey, I want to hire this person. Now I'm going to send them through the background check policy to see if they pass.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, after we've sent them through that background check policy, who's reviewing those results to determine if they passed or didn't pass.
Okay.
Question 4, where, how, and for how long do we want those background checks to be stored, and who will have access to them?
Well, when I worked for Department of Defense, I think they kept everything a minimum of 5 years. And then every 5 years we had to go through it all again. But what's the advantage to keeping them? I mean, if you've already made your hiring decision.
There's been a few times I've looked back on them. Some instances maybe we have on occasion rehired people later on, and or they may come back to test again. So we'll even keep them if we end up not hiring them. And they may come back 3 years later, and we'll look back at that prior one before we even make that decision. So we don't really have any. We don't purge them; they're in their files. We just keep them in there just in case there has been on occasion I've referred to them. So not always, but it's rare, but it does happen.
So you're thinking 5 years?
That was just the DOD standard, but in my mind, for some of these positions, I don't know why. I mean, he's talking very high level background checks. On some of these lower ones, I don't know why you would keep it after you've hired him. But
from the county policies that I've pulled and looked at, some of them keep them with the personnel file for life. Some of them are like a 7-year holding period. I didn't see a lot of like discrimination between levels of employment outlined there, so they probably have department specific stuff. I don't know, but just in their general county policy, it seemed like 5 to 7 years was pretty standard. And then there was one outlier that was just with the personnel file.
I think the personnel file deal would probably be pretty smart if we keep with the personnel file. Because what happens when if the insurance company comes in and something happens down the road and did you check that guy or whatever, did you check him and I wonder if that would say, well, yeah, it's in our
Yeah,
So
just
maybe
be
we
able to
should
pull
put
that
them in
file with all the information.
Okay.
Maybe we should just put them in the regular
Mhm.
employment file.
Okay. One of the things we might have to look at, and Isaac, maybe make a question for us for follow-up is, those background checks that NCI sees, that the FBI does, the FBI requires individuals who are exposed or have access to those to have undergone certain training. So then I guess the follow-up question is if that's going to be put into a personnel file, who has access to that personnel file and has that employee undergone the FBI's training for confidentiality? And that might be an easy fix. It might just be saying, hey, these are the employees that will have access to it. So you're required every year to do your CJIS training.
Oh, you're right. Now what about, well, I was thinking more of the drug testing policy, the drug testing itself, keeping that in the employee's file. I didn't think about the.
Then also I don't know how often it happens, but your employees request to see their file, their personnel file, which we do have on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta.
And that's the second part of the question.
Yeah.
Who will have access to them? So.
We don't allow them to have access to their poly. There's actually a disclaimer they fill out from when they go do their poly that says you will not see your polygraph.
Okay.
So I don't know. There's a rule and the site guy doesn't want them seeing it either. I don't know why, but
Okay.
yeah. So typically, if we disqualify someone for one of those reasons, we just tell them. We just kind of give a general thing. You didn't pass the background, and they'll usually come. Well, why? And you don't get into the specifics. You're just saying you didn't pass our background qualifications. So
there are certain counties that specifically disclaim you can access your personal file, but not the background check. To have at least one example.
So maybe keeping it separated.
Which means your supervisor and or the HR person has to be trained to know what you can and can't go see.
Yeah. Do we want to table this
I
one?
would
Let's
table
table
it.
this one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it can get complex
Yeah.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a guy we didn't hire who wanted to see his background. He didn't pass the background. We wanted to hire him, but he didn't pass the background, and he wanted to see it all. And the only thing we gave him was his medical test he had, his physical and that kind of stuff. We gave him that stuff that we got, but everything else he didn't get.
Okay. Next question, who determines whether or not separate positions within different departments are similar enough in nature and should require a similar or the same background check? So I think the three options that I conceptualized, one is, we can just render our own determination as we put the policy together and try to harmonize these things. We can send all of the ones, or we can just send the spreadsheet as a whole to the BOCC and you guys can sort it out, or we can try to put the burden back on the individual department heads to try to iron out those differences themselves.
I think the first two options make more sense than the third, getting the department heads to decide between this department and that department. It's going to get into the same discussions as pay scale and everything else. I mean, there's so many differences. I think it'd be more interesting to see your recommendation and let the BOCC then approve.
Okay.
That'd just be
I agree with that.
I would agree as well.
All right, we'll plan on just attempting to harmonize those differences ourselves, and then when you guys get the final policy draft, you can critique it and modify it however you guys want.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you.
Next question, are applicants entitled to case-by-case review of individual results?
kind of like what the sheriff's department's doing there as far as maybe making people even sign saying, you're not going to get these results. And we're just going to inform you of our decision based on them.
it eliminates them arguing the fact of individual points in why you base that decision. And I don't want to get into that with them. We've taken the whole picture into account, and from everything we see, you're not a good fit for our position, and you don't pass our background requirements. So
You don't want to sit and argue that, well, I know you were only 34 when you committed that last crime.
I know. No, I don't want to get into it with them. So
And they one of the counties talked about that where they weren't letting them see their background check.
So there's a range. Some of the bigger counties with a lot more positions, it seemed like they tended to be more automatic, whereas a lot of the smaller counties were more willing to sit down. In some cases it was in front of the board, some cases it was HR, and kind of like have more of a case by case review. I think me and Ben also, we talked about sometimes you get something that it doesn't look necessarily so bad on the background check, but you could get like conduct that was pled down to a lesser offense for the guilty charge, or conduct that is maybe not so egregious due to various circumstances. So the case by case review, I think, is more geared towards those situations than it is towards anything that would be an automatic disqualifier. That's been my sense reading through these.
And typically we work through that stuff already in our background process. We're going to go over that and kind of establish those red flags. Our investigator is going to hit those with them, get the explanation. And then our investigator will make a recommendation and let us know what those, and then we'll also relay that information to the poly guy, because we try to do that ahead before we get the poly done. So we've already identified red flags we may want in the poly, or if we do a psych on occasion. And so those are kind of getting addressed in a couple different layers before we make our decision.
It does give you also kind of the edge case option where you're not sure whether a person falls on one side of the line. If you meet with them and get to review and have that kind of individualized discussion, that might aid in the hiring process. I'm not sure. But.
Okay.
And what I would envision that looking like is, if we have these two categories, we have automatic disqualifiers and then we have potential disqualifiers. It would be anything that pops up on the list of potential disqualifiers. The applicant is provided notice of that, and they have 7 days to respond in writing or request an in-person meeting to provide explanation for the potential disqualifier. And then the employer would have, 7 days on the back end to make a decision on whether or not that is or isn't going to be a disqualifier. So that's kind of how I would envision that looking. I mean, you can obviously make it look however you guys want, but from what I've seen in other policies, that's kind of how it plays out.
Okay.
That sounds fair.
The alternative just being you would look at it and just render your decision, even if it's a potential. You would just decide without any input. That's how the other policies are structured.
I like the way Ben described that. If it's an automatic disqualifier, that's one. If it's a potential, then there might be a need for more discussion.
Okay.
Next question, what conduct, if any, would disqualify an applicant from working at any department within Shoshone County? This is the question that we posed just generally because it seemed like we had a broad array of responses from elected officials and department heads. We had some that were saying, any crime of any kind is going to be a disqualifier, and then we had others that said, there's no disqualifiers at all. And it seemed like for some of those positions, it would seem that there's enough similarities that there shouldn't be that big of a difference between what's being required. So it posed the question, do we want any baseline, doesn't matter what department you're in, what position you're in, these couple of crimes are an automatic disqualifier no matter what? Do we want to set that in the policy or no? Do we want to just continue with kind of the individualized department by department analysis?
Now, one of the things just because of the past situation that we've had before, I would like to have your department, make sure that, you know, if there is something that's disqualifying, something on their record, you know, I really think that somebody that knows how to read it needs to kind of review it so that
They're
we
not
know.
easy to read. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if you think of it, just start as a simple approach, felony versus misdemeanor, you know, as your first layer kind of, if they have a felony, is this an automatic disqualifier? You know, it's easy in our position because we already have the rules in place from the state, the IDAPA rules that say, you know, for most of our positions, that say if you have ever had a felony conviction, even if it was expunged, you don't qualify. So right away, if I see a felony conviction in there, I'm like digging into that and I'm like, oh no, you're done.
Yeah.
Although that did just get changed July 1. So it's no longer an automatic disqualifier
For a post?
for post.
Wow.
Standards are changing.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh man,
they did lower the
there's a
standard.
guy I can hire back 2 years ago.
But I mean, your point's still well taken, right?
Yeah, no, I
You have
know.
these varying levels. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
we're close to
Yep, we probably
Our-
better.
tax deed hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
We better run on it.
All right.
Any public questions real fast?
Yeah, on this list, there's nobody that drives a C, or has a CDL or operates heavy
Oh.
equipment.
I just didn't get a chance to fill in that category. Yeah, we haven't asked that question.
And then on public facing, I think everybody is public facing, records clerk for the roads department, snowplow drivers, you know, they all get stopped and have to talk to the public.
Okay.
The questionable on whether you can do anything with an elected official on doing a background check on them, they're elected. You can't fire them.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was, is what about the contractors that work for the county? Are they gonna have to have background checks too, just like the county employees? Cause you got one that I know of that is a contractor that has all the information they can get to, but he's not on this list.
Okay.
And like the jail, I don't think the jail really wants some guy working on their heating system that hates criminal law.
Yeah.
Or been convicted of it.
Yeah. For the most part, if we do a full vetting, background on them, we do a more thorough one if they're gonna be unsupervised doing work. They're gonna be supervised doing work at all times, then we just run a criminal history real quick in-house with their driver's license. And
That's
see,
Sorry about that.
yeah,
That's almost up to the contractor to guarantee that though, not
Yeah.
you guys.
I know. We always check them and
I mean, it's
just to
like
make sure and
when they did the floor, I think they did that at night.
yeah. And there's some companies that are kind of vetted, they've already got that in place that work primarily in jails or something you might bring in and that kind of stuff. They've vetted their guys already and kind of give you that assurance. We'll still run their driver's license when they come in, but some of those guys may work unsupervised that have already been kind of vetted. We're not going to go do a whole background on them for a company where all they do is work in jails and do jail doors and that kind of stuff. But it's
Anything further?
Well, just what Lance was saying there, I mean, I understand what you're saying, they
Yeah.
work in jails all the time, but if you hire an officer that just left another force, you're gonna do a background check on him.
oh yeah.
So, just because they work in jails all the time, doesn't mean there's no record that the guy has. It just, like I said.
We're still checking their record, but to
We're-
do
Actually running out of time because I have 11:30
let's go.
hearing.
Yes.
Anything else? Good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank
bet.
you.
Meeting adjourned. Let me grab my